Hello, friends. This is Sweeny from Parallax Academy. This is just a quick reminder to subscribe and like our YouTube channel and sign up for our newsletter to keep abreast of all of our activities. And if you want to get more involved, Parallax Academy has a membership program, coaching and mentorship, as well as several new courses and study groups. Come and join our convivial hub and network with some of the best thinkers, movers, and visionaries in the world today. And please consider contributing by becoming a patron or making a donation. Join us to help rebuild spirituality, rethink philosophy, and reimagine culture. The links to all of our activities are in the description below. Hello, everybody. Welcome to Parallax Podcasts. My name is Sweeny, and we're here to talk about sex and sex and sex and sex and maybe gender, whatever the fuck that means, and all of these things, kind of from a perspective of having different sexual identities, sexual orientations, sexual life stories, perspectives, etc. You know, beyond the culture war conversation. So I'm just going to ask everybody here to introduce themselves and say who you are, and then we'll get into our discussion. So, would you like to begin, Rachel? Rachel Hayden?
Yeah, sure. I probably had the most coffee by now, so I'll kick it off. Yeah, I guess like my little entry into this corner of the internet was like with John Vervaeke, and I was a Patreon of his a few years ago, and I was going through gender transition at the same time, and we talked a little bit, and he was really excited about how I viewed gender transition as an aspirational developmental process, and not just as like, you know, projecting your true self or something like kind of simplistic of that nature. And so he had me on his channel, like awkwardly, like totally mid-transition. And I just was like, sure, that sounds great. Like, I'll just jump in. I like to jump into things and be awkward. So it was kind of perfect for me. And then I ran into Ayden, like kind of through that, I guess, and like Gregg Henriques' channel and email listserv. And we've been bouncing ideas back and forth. And somewhere along the line, I think, Adriana, you were on UTalk as well. And that's how I found out about you. And like, we just started jamming, and like the real like story is we've been like jamming on this subject now for a while. And we have this like crazy trialogue going like right now with all kinds of like biographies and ideas and perspectives and stuff all thrown together. So the whole thing is this like beautiful swirl of conversation. And I'm wanting to like evoke some of that today. And I'll pass to Ayden, who's also probably more awake.
I'm more awake, but I might be more distracted. I don't know. So my name's Ayden Connor. I have kind of been making my way into the liminal web space as I got into John Vervaeke's work. That was my entry point into all of this. And yeah, I mean, I think Rachel summed it up really, really well as far as like what our dynamic is between the three of us who are visiting and talking on Parallax here today. So yeah, I'm a trans man. I have a toddler. I'm married. I have been really concerned over the years, increasingly concerned over the tenor of the conversation around sex and gender. I do think that there's a reality behind all of this that drives all of our participation in this conversation, because it seems really clear that if anything, the conversation has become increasingly toxic in the last few years. And so what I hope that we can contribute is a healthful, respectful, mindful way of talking about sex and gender that helps to create space for differences, while also recognizing the need to temper basically the more extreme notions that might enter the conversation, if that makes sense. So I think we're all kind of concerned about things like early transition, for example, early medical transition. And that kind of popped to mind as something that, in a weird way, the three of us might be, well, really the four of us might be in a good position to kind of talk about that conversation, even if it doesn't come up today. But yeah, I had like a few thoughts that came up in our exchanges. And I don't know, Adriana, if you wanted to introduce yourself first, but I was going to read that like short little thing that I wrote and posted to the intellectual deep web earlier today, just as an intro to the conversation.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, you can do that if you want, and then I can.
Or you can. I don't know what.
That's a really
Go for it. I mean, let's have a relaxed, spacious conversation, and we have time.
That's good.
We're in no hurry, and well, let's just do our thing here.
All right, cool.
And then the coffee will sink in by the time you finish.
Right.
Yeah, like
caffeinated person.
I hope so. I hope so. It was there was one opportunity that the three of us had to work together on a presentation for the Consilience conference a few months ago, which Gregg Henriques helped to organize through the Unified Theory of Knowledge Society. And in preparation for that, I was just the moderator. So we had a few conversations, and I prepared like basically prepared a little piece to be able to introduce the conversation. And it felt really useful in that case. So in preparation for this, I just kind of felt like that would be a good way to begin things. When the rain falls in the watershed, a torrential downpour hits the top of the watershed. Erosion and destruction might come to mind for those of us moderns accustomed to paved roadways and suburban sprawl, where the mimetic savanna provides us perceived comfort and safety, where the strip malls in the neighborhoods have impenetrable encasement of the earth below. Water flows unimpeded, increasing in force as it rushes down the various pavements that smooth out our lives. Year after year, the water shoots down the watershed, and year after year, the land and its inhabitants suffer for both too dry and too wet cycles. The torrential downpour is the wild, energetic force of the gods who demand mediation, and without appeasement in landforms and receptive media, their destruction will reign. What is their demand? What is required of us? Tangential flow comes to mind. What the fractal pattern of the manageable watershed teaches us is that we can intentionally channel, disperse, and collect water so that there's no such thing as a too wet or a too dry cycle. Where the tangential flow over topsoil mediates the watershed, the destructive force of the gods is nowhere to be found. The land mediates the water through the curves of her spine, the contours of her soft skin, and the hydrological force is appeased into slowed infiltration as it seeps into the soil, gathers into ponds, and settles calmly at the end of the descent. This is the dynamism of the shaman mediated through the matriarch, her mythos acting as the alpha and omega of the inner sanctum of the community. She sees the shaman and welcomes them in with open arms, embracing them. But in her wisdom, her judgment mediates the flow of the waters, dispersing the raw force of the shaman and collecting some of this creative generative power to sustain us for tomorrow and the day after that, and the day after that, ad infinitum.
Thank you very much. Yeah, that's nice.
Beautiful. Really beautiful. Your words tend to bring me to tears, Ayden. Yeah, that's kind of lovely too. So I was just trying to work out where to begin, and maybe well, my entry point to this this corner of the internet was with the Rebel Wisdom community, and I became really active in that space. Then after the Rebel Wisdom community kind of started dissipating, something else was formed, and I was a part of the forming of that. So it was a collective now called Emergent Commons, which is active, and it's a really beautiful hub of online sharings, and it's horizontal leadership. So it's really beautiful because we were able to work through when David and Ellie came out and how to make this horizontal leadership, and in so there's a lot of interesting things that came out of that. So that's happening, and through that I made lots of connections and friendships and exchanged a lot throughout this time. So my curiosity was always I was curious about the feminine, and not necessarily females, and there was a constant conflation of that. Every time I'd be like, there's something missing here. In the beginning, it was just I was just very enamored. I love the whole concept. I love all of it, and I think it was very timely and was very important. I loved the introduction of John Vervaeke and Jordan Hall, and a lot of names and a lot of friends that I made. And then at some point I was like, okay, I'm missing something. And every time I felt I was missing something, the question was like, okay, show me a woman that is like the Daniel Schmartenberg. And I was like, that's not the right question. That's not the right question. So this movement in myself, and of course, to frame what I did before that. So before my trajectory was around 15 years ago or 14 years ago, I was initiated into the lineage of the menstrual cycle in a woman, which is like something that you have to be initiated upon these days because it's a lost wisdom. So I was initiated by a teacher, and I was really curious about that. I was like, oh my God, I'm being an adult for a while, and I didn't know that. I didn't know the wisdom of the cycles. So that had me curious. And so I dove deep into that feminine wisdom. And then after that, I moved into developmental work with developmental models and integral theory and stuff like that. And there was just at the time of rebel wisdom that naturally those things started integrating in me. So I was I was coming back into this feminine curiosity, and I was seeing a lot of the integral theory frames and development. A lot of that was present, but there was a lot that I was interested in bringing back, and it felt relevant for the conversations. And then with these two beautiful people here, I met Rachel first through Gregg, and then we had conversations, and then we just really hit it off. We were just like, oh my God, this is really, we jam really well, and it feels really beautiful. And then Rachel's like, you need to meet Ayden. And then we connected, and then we recorded something for a project that I have now, which is called Final and Full Circle, which is attempting to bring shed lights in lots of the angles of the masculine and feminine. And now we have this WhatsApp thread conversation going between us that's very energized, and I see it as a live philosophy. We're kind of we're not bringing from the logos and trying to fit into our lives. We're going like, this is how it is here, and how is it for you, and this is how it is here, how is it for you? And because we have a lot of crossover and nuance, my nuance with the menstrual cycle and the awareness that brings, and then the nuance of Rachel's life experience and Ayden's life experience gives a very fertile territory for overlapping and seeing where it matches, and where the constructs are failing, and where the narratives are collapsing. And so we've been just like enjoying a deep friendship and also deep philosophical explorations. So it's nice to be here with the two of them and with you. Yeah.
Wonderful. Well, maybe I could say a few things kind of about my background and perspective in relationship to, let's say, what I've thought about this stuff in terms of sexuality and gender. And so, I'm married, I have 2 kids, ordinary guy, or whatever that means. I've been thinking about sex and gender for a long time. I read a book by Ivan Illich called Gender. It was put out in 1980. And according to people who follow Illich, he kind of invented this term, but what people mean by it now is completely something else. So what he meant was complementarity. He didn't mean it, and he was very critical about sort of what he called economic sex and transaction, and the way that the sort of the way the 1950s world was with, you know, sort of very hyper atrophied gender roles, behaviors, etc. So in one way it was kind of traditional, and another way it was trying to honor you know, gender, which he meant which he meant complementarity. He didn't, but you know, and I've been practicing, you know, in Buddhist tantric tradition for a long time, and one of the things you do in Buddhist tantra is you play a lot with you know, you play a lot with let's say sexualized images of men and women in different, you know, positions. So for example, you might, in a deity yoga practice, you might imagine yourself as a woman, and in the outward practices you might dress up like a woman, and in the inward practices you might just do that inwardly, and nobody would even know. So there is some sort of, let's say, complementarity and fluidity at the same time in that tradition. It's not saying we've got to get back to anything in which never existed in my view. So some ways I'm very fond of Jordan Peterson, but I find that his I find that there's a kind of a powerful let's say something regressive in that, in what in his whole perspective of that. Even if I can understand some of the issues related to young people in surgery and all that. So you know, when Adriana approached me, I had just spoken to Jordan Peterson's wife, and she was, you know, she was promoting a kind of conservative view, and I appreciate her, and I you know. So I you know, and I want to have all kinds of people on Parallax with different points of view. So I thought it might be in the wake of that discussion, where she was quite critical of transgender ideology, it would be great to have you guys on to talk about that stuff. So
Yeah. Well, I think we're all critical of transgender ideology as well, the way that it's commonly framed. So
yeah,
maybe that's a part of our starting point.
Well, can you say why? Can you go into that a little bit?
Yeah, totally. And this was, you know, for me, like, this is all woven with life, right? I don't have like a theory that's separated from my own existence and then bouncing it off of like these two friends and other people. But like the idea that there's somehow like this gender thing that's completely separate from sex is like absurd to me. Like, it makes no sense to me, like, to say either that, you know, gender is just a social construct, or gender is just something you feel inside yourself. Because, you know, if it's something you feel, what is this feeling about? What does it have to do with? Why does it emerge in us in the first place? What's it connected to in the human being? If it's just a social construct, there's really no reason to transition, in my opinion. You know, at least for me, like why do I have this deep sense of like not fitting in the gender that I was, you know, born in and grew up in? Like, it didn't make any sense to me to, on one hand, say you have to value you have to respect everyone's pronouns, you know, for instance, and then on the other hand to say gender is just a social construct. It seemed like a total contradiction in terms. And so, you know, that's like one example of how I feel like, you know, really, I think Ayden and I especially are like critical from within the transgender community. And like, I don't think either of us are super connected to like the transgender community, whatever that might be, because we don't tend to have that same viewpoint. And we both, and Adriana too, you know, think of this topic as much more complex, much more developmental, much more nuanced, and also needing a lot of space and needing the conversation, like these guys have talked about a little, like to open up around the subject and to say like, look, all of these one-sided views are one-sided views. Like, and so like we need to start looking at everything possible to open up space before we can even have something reasonable to talk about.
Yeah, just to interject here, one of the things that struck me in listening to you and Owen on Tech to Social podcast talk about your experiences is that there's this promotion of fluidity in the culture. And the more I hear you talk, you know, about the more I hear that, you know, a man becoming a woman it gives you a lot of insight about the fact that there is such thing as woman. It's just in a different kind of body, and your insights on actually the feminine principle were quite profound, I thought. But in the culture, we don't want to talk about there being a feminine and masculine principle.
Totally. Yeah. How do you have a conversation about transgender without gender, like without sex, right? Like,
yeah. So there's a fear of essentialization, and then, but there is something called female and male, and that can take many forms. Sorry, Adriana, go ahead.
No. I think that's perfect. It's just because I think that's where I come in, because I think that where I come in is the place of like, we forgot that we're not the same. Like, I'm totally up for, I don't think there's it's as binary as I might make it sound when I speak. It's just that we forgot so much. There's so much forgetfulness that I think that when we have a construct in our minds that we're the same, and this might have been this probably was the byproduct of feminism or modernity, and it's, it had its place. I'm not saying it didn't have its place, maybe socially, but we forgot that actually. So for example, just for a tiny little example, when I'm teaching my workshop, so we talk about the cycles of the days, and the cycle of the hours of the day, and the cycle of the seasons. So if I'm just giving an example, what I feel now, it's 6 a.m. for me. For Andrew, it's like 10 p.m. For Rachel and Ayden, it's 3 p.m. So that feels really different. That is a felt experience of it's very different. In a woman's body, she cycles just like that. She's cycling every day in a hormonal way. So when I bring that in, it's not to stick to that, but it's just to say a man's body doesn't have that. So the felt experience with reality, this fluidity of being, is matched in the cycles. So when Rachel and I, we exchange about the hormone transition, and of course it goes beyond that, because there's the brain, and Rachel can go into that. But when she says, wow, when I started taking estrogen, that started happening more visibly. And then I go, because I don't have anything to compare with. If I'm fluid and I only have fluidity, I have nothing to bounce off. And if the world outside of me doesn't see that, then I become crazy. So it's like, oh, but I'm not that. Hold on. And then so for a lot of a lot of women I work with, they still think some of their perspectives is crazy, because they're constantly not matching this other form of whatever it is, confidence, or they get more exhausted and they feel less than. And so there's a lot of things that go on. But when I talk to these two, it's beautiful, because we go like, no. There's something that we're reviving here, and they're showing very clearly that there is this other, and this other is like when Rachel says aspirational. I resonate with that, and that is not this that I have. So that makes it very distinct. So there is a that's not this, and that to me is fundamental. That's when Bard talks about the shamanoids and the shamans in the fringes, waking us up to the waters that we have been swimming in for so long that we kind of forgot we're swimming in that water. I think that these Rachel and Aydan are fundamental. What they bring is fundamental to waking us up to something that's important, which is the distinctions. And that doesn't mean that they're endorsing childhood transition. And they're very different things that we often get conflated, and then we lose the thread of conversation. And
wonderful. Yeah, I mean, it occurs to me that there's something extremely creative about getting to know the other, and that whatever sex you are, like if you're a man and you're attracted to women, sometimes your attraction goes so deep you want to be that person. I remember as a young man, kind of like, I grew my hair long, and I hung around with women because I wanted to be that because I was in love with women. It wasn't because I was gay or, you know, or trans or anything like that. But there is a transcendental process that we go in getting to know the other, which I guess trans people take on very literally and very creatively, and that seems to me very interesting. Mm-hmm. Ayden, do you wanna comment?
Yeah, I think it really points to the imaginal as being really important to the selfing process, as I would call it, and that this is that how we inhabit gender is like, I don't think it's like something that's given, because there's such a wide there's such a broad spectrum that's available as far as like the specifics of your culture and like how you're embedded in that. But yeah, I think that there's something very real at the root of it that is based in a reality that is real enough that we can kind of like circle around it, if that makes sense. So like, as hard as it might be to put into like, to boil things down into like narrow definitions, and how impossible that might be and how unproductive that might be in some cases, like, again, just another way of saying the same thing you are all saying, like, this is something that we all know is a part of how we're interacting with each other. There's like some extent that I think there's something about sexuality that's just embedded in the human experience. And one of the ways that I like to talk about how it connects in with gender is just this idea of taking what would be an adaptation in evolutionary terms. And because of our capacities as humans, we've, in many different ways, gone through this process called exaptation, which is just taking adaptation and using that adaptation towards something that suits something completely new. And to me, that's essentially that's how I look at gender in humans, is that this is something that was like, there was this seed, there's this basis that's very biological, that's very evolutionary, that goes into such a like deep part of our history that it's undeniable. Yet, because of our nature and because of the way that we have taken this up and kind of extrapolated out of it, the reality is that we actually do have wiggle room. So where there might be a biological basis, there's like a biological reality. I think that as humans, because of the way that we interact with our identities, because of the way that we interact in our world, there is a reality of options when it comes to how we actually inhabit our bodies, how we actually express ourselves in our sexuality. So it's hard, because a lot of the conversation ends up going like, oh, like kind of the basic like nature versus nurture conversation, which is just super tired and not nearly nuanced enough. And I think like we sell ourselves short by thinking about things in either extreme. And yeah, I think that realizing that that root is real, that there is a root there, also needs to be paired with the aspirational part of it, the fact that we have options, that there's something more ethereal and less and a lot less tangible than strict biological terms to reach towards when we try to like think about and inhabit gender.
Yeah, and even within the biology, there's a lot of diversity, I suppose, right? It's not a dualistic, thing. There's always a third element there. So I like to think of like what's interesting is, and I kind of agree with, Bart was talking about there should be male, female, and then this third, which could be anything, because that would simplify things so much and make us understand that a third is necessary, like one that's not this or not that. And we're all not this or not that. Like, we all have degrees of masculinity and femininity within us, unless we're like super, hyper polarized alpha male or entirely sexual, female or motherly. But we're all kind of a mix of all these things, right? To a certain extent. And what is called heterosexuality is just that we're more comfortable in that particular, balance of male and female. But I think there's always a third element. There's always that, and that's what makes life kind of a dynamic process, rather than just a static, platonic world. Am I making any sense?
We want to like keep it fresh, right? We want to like bring some beauty to the whole thing. And if say like, part of the role of like sex gender in primates is to provide like a bifocal vision on the world, like maybe like males tend to see things this way and, primate group females this way. And then like somehow they're like communicating and getting some depth perception, like then our human cultures should be more adaptive in that regard, right? Like, so we could be able to like say like, oh, like maybe like the way that we're seeing things through our gender lenses needs to be shifted. Maybe those lenses need replacing or something. And then the people in between, the margin walkers, can help kind of put a lens on those lenses themselves and say like, okay, how are they functioning? Do we need to tweak it a little bit? And kind of just mess with things a little bit to keep things fresh.
I love that metaphor.
As you were talking,
the depth perception. That's really cool.
Depth
Stealing from John.
Yeah.
As you were talking, it occurs to me that each one of you, and perhaps me as well, are going there is a journey, so to speak, towards a creative. There's that identity is not a static thing, which is like, okay, this is a man, this is a woman, we're born like this. So Adriana, maybe your journey is towards, femininity, try to understand what that is, right? And the same with Rachel and Adriana, or you're moving towards femininity. And when I was describing the fact that as a young guy, I was really very feminine and had long hair and kind of like, very emotional and sort of like a very feminine guy. And then what my journey was kind of to discover masculinity, So I think that's very interesting that there's always a work in progress, and something to discover. Maybe you guys could talk a little bit about that journey, or just give our listeners a bit of a taste of your life story. Maybe we could start with you, Rachel, because we began again.
Okay. Adriana, did you want to say something earlier?
No, I was just gonna inject the frames of there's an element of integral theory and the developmental models that it might be useful when talking about that, because gender and sex. And a while ago, I was going to work with Terry O'Fallon on creating a gender inventory, so basically the growing up of sex and gender. So when we talk about it, when I hear us talking about this fluidity, it's like, and I'm not making the developmental stages are, I know there's a whole controversy on developmental stages, but I'm not going into that, going to the truth of a young child that is less complex in their making sense of reality. And so even what a child aspires to is smaller, like what they can see of the reality is smaller than, a philosophical approach they can have to things. So I think that this is important because, and I know I'm not sure if I'm completely diverting from the history, but so my piece, when you said, Andrew, my piece not necessarily is that I'm discovering femininity. I mean, maybe when I describe my journey is something else, but it's more about, if integral theory brings, one thing that I think it's important is the transcend and include piece. So you're transcending, but you need to include what has been forgotten. So for me, it's more like there are bits that we have forgotten that needs to be remembered, and then we can transcend in whatever way, creative way we want. But if we transcend before including fundamental pieces, then what happens at the end is distorted, because then we can make believe that piece never existed to start with. So if we start if the starting point is that we're the same, that's an erroneous starting point. We're not the same. So they're
Yeah.
physiological. And then we bring that in and we remember that very vividly and we inhabit that. And then once we do that, we go like, oh, there is a sliding scale. And it's like learning how to play an instrument and then wanting to bypass the chords, and just jamming. We can't be proficient in the thing if we forget the core distinctions. And I think we have forgotten the core distinctions as society overall, because modernity has us operate in a way that is not.
Right. Well, maybe I'm personalizing by saying you're discovering femininity. That might be not accurate. But I think in a way what's more accurate is the entire culture has an amnesia towards certain aspects of let's say, male and female experiences that were once very perennial, right? Like as you talk about cycles and menstrual cycles and what that means to women in the modern world, it doesn't mean very much to a lot of women, I don't think. Or, I mean, it does, but it's not supposed to mean that much. It's just another appendage, that we carry around. But the deeper, profundity of that is probably lost. Is that more accurate?
Yeah, and I would say that it's not even doesn't mean much. It means it's an inconvenience. So therefore, my curiosity, and so then my curiosity about anything that is creative, even creative, if we're going to use the creativity of what it is to inhabit that, we don't harness, because we get a piece of it and go like, oh, that sucks, I don't want that. And then my openness to that closes. Whereas, for example, Rachel's openness to the distinctions in her when she's in progesterone or in estrogen is an openness. Her awareness is just going like, I'm curious. Oh, in progesterone, I feel this way. So if you are curious about anything in life, then you see it. If you are completely collapsed into like, I don't have anything, I just fuck, I hate this shit, whatever it is, then you don't see it. So there's no openness. And I think that unfortunately we have, due to this, instead of reciprocal opening with reality and women's bodies, we have had reciprocal closing. So reality says cycles are nothing and women go like cycles are nothing. And then we do this, and therefore it becomes ingrained as if cycles are nothing. And then when in conversations with Rachel and Ayden, we can surface that there's visible distinctions, and it's beautiful to see they're both. When I see Rachel and Ayden in conversation, they can point to, because they're coming from different ends, and it's beautiful. So they make that visible, and there we can transcend and include in whatever way makes sense to your personal creativity, and then we can be fully free and creative in our expression, I think.
Great. Okay, well, what I guess I want to do is I want to maybe ask some perhaps naive questions about the trans experience, right? Why one would want to become, trans, like Rachel, born in a man's body, and then you would want to become trans, and why you didn't, why you weren't gay or something, like why you decided not just to be gay, or how much of that is decision and how much of that is just you're like that. And so it's a kind of I guess a naive type of interest. Like what makes you jump from being, like, let's say gay to trans? What's that jump? Because it seems like a quantum leap on some level from gay to trans. And maybe I have that wrong, but I'm just curious. I'd like to hear your experience, and then I'd like to hear Ayden's experience as well, and hear why you wanted to become trans, and about a little bit about that journey.
Yeah, totally cool. No, naivety is sexy to me. This is great as far as the stuff goes, because it's like the opening is just so important right now. I feel like so I'll answer like as best I can. I think it's like a super complex, rich soup of things that goes into transitioning for me. Like there were definitely early childhood experiences of like, kind of like I mentioned it on a recent video with Owen and Raven and Bard, like, just like of kind of a persistent like daydream fantasy of having like different genitalia, like a penis that was like a Y-shaped hollow tube and stuff like that. Like just very like different experiences early on, being like definitely trying to seduce neighborhood boys early on, being attracted to girls, like all kinds of like, you know, just difference. I was like a really queer kid. I didn't have like any sense of what being trans was at the time, you know, so it was a long time later in my 40s that I was finally like, oh, you know, I think maybe this ongoing sense of strangeness, not fitting in society, fitting in the world, being like sexually atypical, but never really fitting sexually either. And like having like feeling like a mismatched puzzle piece that's always colliding with the other puzzle pieces around me in some sense. Like it finally all kind of came clear in a flash of like painful, you know, realization, so to speak. So it's hard to say it's a choice. It's hard to say it's not a choice when it comes to transitioning. Obviously, there is an element of choice there where you're like, okay, I'm going for it. But it's something that I feel like you ideally one participates in. Is a process that you participate in. You're basically participated by the process. It kind of takes over, and the person that gets spit out on the other side is not necessarily predictable to the one who's going in. So you kind of have to just throw caution to the wind a little bit. You know, so I don't know if that, I know it's like it's so hard for me to summarize all of it, because like maybe like another example, like the first moment I actually felt that sharp pain, what they call gender dysphoria. I think that, you know, that word has a lot of meanings for people, but the pain associated with my sex or gender, like was looking at one of those stupid apps that used to be popular where like you could like change your gender and, you know, like put in a picture and then it spits out a picture of supposedly the opposite sex. And it did that, and it worked for, like, the picture turned out pretty well. And I was like hit with this wave of pain, but it was the thought that was associated with it, or the feeling was like, that person should have been there for my brother. Like my brother should have had an older sister growing up. And like, that would have like, the sense that I could have been more present as that person was like profound for me, and heavy and deep and painful, you know? And so like, Ayden and I have had this like same like realization for a long time, that sex and gender are like on a continuum, but like that sex like blossoms into these new dimensions, you know, in society and in our hearts as primates and in our minds as people, you know, and our culture. And like that difference was so heavy for me that, you know, I could have gone my whole life and felt like, yeah, I'm like this like weird bisexual guy who doesn't really like fit in and kind of has issues, but like that feeling of like, I should have been there for someone, you know, like I want to be there for people as my whole self. I want to become whoever that person is, because it was just so fucking painful to feel like I wasn't there for people when I should have been.
So does that mean that femininity for you means a kind of presence for being there for other people, a kind of presence for other people? Is that a powerful attractor towards femininity? A kind of
it was like me, like it was that if I didn't have that friction in my life, then I could be there fully.
Gotcha. Okay.
If I could fit somehow, I could flourish, I could develop into who I should have been, or could be. And it does have to do with femininity for me too, because I feel like that's like the relational part of gender is so huge for me, which is why like I flip between the words sex and gender so much, because like I feel like our culture needs to, for now, think about those things on different levels a little bit, but connected, because it is like, to me, like I love like smiling at people. I know this is like I'm kind of like Adriana and I talk about it. Like I'm like a naive woman in a lot of ways. Like I like to like smile at people on the street or whatever. And like, I just like love being like the kind of connecting glue in society and in like friend groups and like work groups and between groups of people. Like, it's just, to me, it's like a dream, and I've like flourished a lot as like like more relational person. Like my relational side has really grown immensely as a result. So I would say like, yeah, both of those things are true.
Wow. That's quite a witnessing. Yeah, that's very, very interesting. for me. Like the fact that it's a move towards fullness in a sense, right? The full on thing.
Exactly. It's like having a shoe that's too tight your whole life, but it's like around your heart or something, or you know what I mean? Like part of you is asleep from the blood loss.
Got it. So Ayden, do you wanna tell us a bit?
Yeah. So I have a little bit of an odd history just because I came from a devout Mormon family households. And so as I was growing up, there was like a lot of where like our general culture, our broad culture has been kind of like blurring the lines between masculine and feminine. In the Mormon culture, that's not the case at all. There's very much like very clear lines that are drawn in terms of what the roles are between the husband and the wife of a household with kids. Like that's the expectation. And so, I had experiences growing up that were very similar. Like Rachel and I were just like literally just sharing about this week that like, I also had like early childhood experiences of experimentation with boys and girls, and that there was always a sense for me that I always felt like an outsider, and I was always kind of feeling like, very much awkward, like feeling like I was more like playing a part than I was inhabiting myself. That's like the best way to put it. So I like always felt like I was like, okay, what's the right line there? Like, I can't remember like what the next thing is in the script that I'm supposed to say here. Like there was just a sense of like, of just a disconnect. Like there was just a level of dissociation with who I was, but it wasn't. What's interesting for me is that like the idea and the concepts that you hear, the common trope of, oh, I was born in the wrong body, has never really like felt right to me because I am who I am, and I don't see how I could be in any way the same person if I had been born in a man's body. I wouldn't be the same person. Like there's no way I would have become this, like in terms of perspective, in terms of how I'm able to participate in culture. Like there are affordances to like having a pathway that is out of the norm, that you can, if you're thinking through it and trying to be cautious and considerate, like you can really use that towards a lot of good, without challenging other people's realities, which is like a big part of it that I think is upsetting to a lot of people, is feeling like their reality is being challenged, like the reality of their identity is being challenged on a personal level. But
Can
yeah,
I just ask a clarifying question here?
Mm-hmm.
This sense of dissociation that you felt,
Yeah.
was that because you didn't feel like a woman, or was it just because you didn't feel like you fit in that particular culture? What was that?
No, I mean, it was more, I think it was highlighted for me more because of the segregation between the sexes. It was probably more obvious to me that I wasn't fitting in those cases because, for example, it was 100% expected that I wore a dress or a skirt every time I went to church. And it was 100% uncomfortable every time I did that. You know what I mean? Like, so there's this weekly reminder, and every single time that you go to a church meeting, you have the first meeting is together, everybody together. So that's like the equivalent of the mass in like a Catholic service or whatever. And then you would break out into basically there's 3 hours. First hour is that. Second hour is you're with your same age group. So if you're a teenager, you're with the other teenage boys and the other teenage girls. And then the third hour, you're sex segregated. And so there's just like a a very like it's very methodically segregationist kind of dynamic between the genders in Mormon culture, and that definitely like comes into the power structures involved. There's basically like patriarchal leadership is what leads all of it, leads the entire church and organization. And then there's like a separate female leadership that only really like leads in like the feminine spaces. And so anyways, just to give a sense for that, like, I don't know, there's things that I experienced, like I remember like feeling really confused about like wanting to go on a mission. Like being a missionary was something that like both that is something that both like women and young men and young women will do in Mormon culture, but it's like it's basically almost assumed that you're going to go and do that if you're a young man, and if you're a young woman, like absolutely not assumed. Like you're like awesome if you want to go do a mission, but like this is not the expectation we have from you. And that also kind of like leads into expectations with education and like in the job market as well. So like when I was struggling in school, I never got the sense that there was like a message where my parents were like, look, like you need to be responsible in these ways because you need to be able to take care of yourself. That was never like a part of the conversation for me. It was just kind of like an undercurrent implication that I was going to be getting married and that whoever I married was going to take care of me. So there's like, it's a very, anyways.
So there was no journey towards personhood or autonomy so much as that everything was laid out for you in some sense.
Yeah. And that's a pattern that's repeated. Like I don't want to make it out as if it's like women are the only ones who are being oppressed in religion like that. It's definitely both. Like I had a male cousin who committed suicide way back. Like it was basically like the first week that I was starting at university. So it's been a very, very long time, a couple decades now. But yeah, he committed suicide and it was like a mystery why it happened. But I know like it's just kind of like this sense that I have that it had something to do with the pressures that he was experiencing from church, because he had to like leave his mission early. And I think that there was like a lot going on behind the scenes there, as far as like, you know, the sense of failure. Like it's like these expectations are kind of like put on top of all of the individuals that are a part of these communities. And then if you can't quite like make it, if you can't quite like meet those expectations, because of like the deep dualism involved, the shame runs very deep, and the pain of that failure runs very deep. And so, yeah, I would say like I came from kind of one of the more extreme ends of the spectrum when it comes to like sex segregation. So when I was like I listened to your interview with Tammy Peterson, and I was like, oh, this all sounds very familiar to me. Like it wasn't.
That's the kind of thing you were hearing from people around you.
Yeah, like there's like deep questioning of like where do women actually fit in to culture? You know, like how much can male and female spaces really be blended? Like there's kind of like a weird level of suspicion, I feel like, that, you know, carries in a lot of presumptions about like where we're each coming from, and like how much we can really understand each other. And I think it's really important to like emphasize that to say that there are real differences between men and women is not to say that like those differences are inhibiting people from exploring outside of those differences.
Yeah.
And that there's no like that there aren't like ways of bridging those gaps. Like I think if I were to say like what the real problem is, like as we're all kind of like coming to realize now, is that by smoothing over those differences, none of us are winning. None of us are able to support each other the way that we need to be supported. None of us are able to thrive in the way that we could thrive if we embrace these differences. We're essentially like making all of the people like more impotent in some way by kind of like collapsing a lot of what gives us like the most flavor and spice and interesting vitality towards our lives. Like that's what I see is missing. And I think that's why like Adriana, Rachel, and I have like connected around this, because it feels like a cultural project. It feels like something that's potentially generative and could shift things in a way that like brightens life for everybody.
Yeah. Just a point about what Tammy was saying, Tammy Peterson. It occurred to me that in a way, you know, you guys are looking for in a way the same thing, and that is sexual difference, right? Like her inquiry is like, where's the sexual difference? You know, where's that gone? Why are women not women anymore and men not men anymore? You know, and why is that not being talked about? And so I think there's a validity there somehow. But I agree with you that there's not a part of the conversation of this third element, or these people who are, you know, don't fit in one or the other. I mean, I think, you know, I should send this conversation to her, and I feel like it would be good if I sent it to her and Jordan and see what they said. But
yeah, I mean, I actually like I definitely feel like it would be good, like as an exercise if nothing else, to share it. I don't know how it would be received, but yeah, like Jordan Peterson was actually like a really big influence on me. Like about 5 years ago, I got like into his work, and I listened through 12 Rules for Life. And it definitely like had a positive impact on me. And it's like I've like had an ongoing interest in keeping up with his work, just because I see the value, I see like the need there, at least in some levels of society. Like I think Bard would refer to this as like being kind of like taking part of the sutric realm, you know, 12 Rules for Life. Like this is the sutric realm that he's discussing. And I think like I think something that'd be really like generative is to discuss and consider the whole Bard absolute concepts, like the idea of Tantra, the idea that like there's some things that like in our society, because we've blended, we've kind of like taken down a lot of the boundaries between like what adults have access to and are like condoned to do, and what kids have access to and are condoned to do. That there's a certain level of like a loss of innocence in some sense, and there's also a loss of I'm trying to think of an adequately provocative term, but just like there's something that like there's a certain level of sexual energy of adulthood that's almost missing as well. Like we're kind of like missing those two ends of the spectrum as well. Like that to me seems to be what the Bard Absolute is all about, is to say, okay, like we should be able to have spaces that are adult spaces where people are more experimental and fluid, and you can take higher risks within a space that's dedicated towards that kind of process. Because when you let like those like more risky kind of risky experimental things like out of the adult realm and like let it bleed into like where kids are, it kind of ruins it for everybody. It's like it actually like it ruins it for both the adult and for kids, and you end up with like shitty development for kids and shitty development for adults.
Well, that's the thing, is he's expressing a lot of outrage, towards the surgery, and young people, and I guess the capitalization of the trans experience. And in a way, there's a validity to that, but I was thinking that sort of scapegoats the whole experience. So
Yes.
it might be good to distinguish. Again, we talked about that right at the beginning, but it might be good to really distinguish the let's say mimetic quality of this, consumerist quality of this, the fact that people imitate each other and copy each other, in a very naive way, and then the genuine experience which you guys are expressing, and the genuine like healing that comes from becoming more fully who you are, which is kind of Jordan Peterson's thing anyway. Become who you are, right? But
Like
So
writing
may I
your
add one
story.
thing?
yeah, please, Adrian, jump in.
Maybe I'll just add one thing, or a couple of things. One is the notion of rites of passages that has been completely lost in our culture, which is a fundamental thing. So when I hear Rachel's story and Aydan's story, I'm like, you initiated yourselves. And it's transitioning. The way I see it is a very outward ego death experience. You're basically like, it's a very courageous act, and you commit everything, your whole construct of this person. You're like, I'm gonna die. This person's not gonna come out. It's super courageous. But I think that I'm hesitant to say this is rare. I don't know. I don't know how many people transition. I don't know that with that type of awareness. Maybe some. I don't know. But I'm thinking it's such an ego death experience that I think it requires a lot of awareness. And to be this, when I heard Rachel saying, I wanted to be there for my brother, I wanted to, because if I'm not having this tension in my body, if I'm not so confused about my state, I can be full with others in relationship. That makes total sense to me. And that feels like a movement away from narcissism, a movement towards being with the world, as opposed to when transitioning as a child, you are needing a rite of passage, because you need a rite of passage when you go from childhood to adolescence. You're deconstructing your ego structure from child, and you're becoming something else. And that is really, really unsettling time. And I think it gets confused in our culture, together with all sorts of stuff. For example, postmodern parents that don't know how to say no. And then you combine that with a very angry child going through hormonal transitions in themselves, like all of us. Then you combine that with like us humans not dealing with anger well, or frustrations, or people's emotions, and just wanting to temper it. So if my child goes like, I want to do this, and I'm like, okay, instead of like an adult, like when I hear, and I don't think Aydan was meaning that, but when I think, when you said about adults having adult places, that landed for me in a different way. But I agree with what you said. And what I thought was like, our culture is not an adult culture. Like we're not mature, like we're a bit of adolescents. And in a way, if we're adults, we go like, okay, kids, hold on, but I'm not saying that there are not cases. That's when we need to make space for the exceptions. There are cases of really tiny little kids that were, since they were born, had a particular inclination. And these little kids, I'm not saying that they shouldn't transition. That feels very different to me than a case of a child that has never shown any signs of anything, and it hits 11, and it goes like, oh, I'm confused. Now I put on top of my confusion a frame that maybe I'm not what I am, whatever it is.
Yeah.
And then, so they're transitioning from a place of confusion, and they're not becoming less narcissistic as they grow up. They become more. So then their gender is all that they think about, as opposed to what I hear they're still doing, which is like, now I'm free to talk about anything else, because I'm okay here. And and just the last piece that I wanted to add is that in this week, Rachel, Ayden, and I were talking about, and I brought in Thomas Hubel, I don't know if people here know him, but he works with trauma and he works with all sorts of different things. But he works with like Palestinians and Israelis and Nazis and Jews and very big topics like that. And one thing that he says is intimacy is when I feel you feeling me. So when I see their transition, it's like, oh, now the world can feel my insides more accurately. And therefore, I'm more free to have this reciprocity with the world. And then I can just be a full human and participate in life as an adult. And I feel this is healthy. So this feels healthy. And at the same time, we're not saying that every child that has this doubt has to transition. That's we don't think that. So
yeah, well, I think there's a lot of manipulation on the part of the parents. So you could have fundamentalist manipulation, like the kind maybe Ayden experienced. And then the other kind of manipulation is just cultural ideological manipulation. It's like, you should be different and, go ahead and, so that's not real parenting either, I wouldn't say. So one of the things that Alexander said that I thought was very, very good in your discussion was that a person transitioning should love their old self or respect their old self, respect like who they were before. And that if that act was done out of sort of self-hatred, hatred for the society and just wanting to be different, that there's something maybe dangerous about that. But the process of but if this is, again, as I totally agree with Adrian, I think that was beautiful. It's this idea of needing, because we all go through unconscious rites of passage because we don't have those structures to guide us through them, right?
Yeah, exactly. And that the kids have to determine their rites of passages, and we're kind of like in some ways losing our adulthood to say, actually, I'm your carer. I have to care for you and for your well-being until you become mature and an adult and you can make those decisions for yourself. So when we're afraid of actually the hurt that we might cause, and I see this in my kids. I have 2 kids and it's different. But sometimes I do want to say yes because it's really hard to keep saying no, and they get angry and they're frustrated, and and then you have add to that the pressure of society that you might be being a bad parent if your child wants to transition and you don't want them to transition. It's really complicated. So I wouldn't even say it's a bad parent. I'm like, it's confusion. We're in this glass of confusion, and we need a lot of compassion towards one another instead of like really being aggressive towards one another. I mean, if I to say, I appreciate Jordan Peterson's arguments and his narrative, and he's a very smart man, and his wife. And however, I'd say that every time we just go from one position and we go really aggressively, what happens is that we might miss a lot of little nuances that are, the signal that Rachel and Aydan are bringing, which I think is important. And when Aydan said, I didn't think I was in the wrong body. I love this. I want to be this history, even though it was hard. All this incredible rite of passage that they both went through. Rachel wouldn't be Rachel and have all this wisdom. That's of course what she came to do. And Aydan, they wouldn't have this if they had just been born as a woman and a man. So I think this is a sign of, in some ways, a healthy transition. Is showing exactly what you said, Andrew. I love my old self and I died to that as my ego death, but I bring that wisdom from the past and I integrate it as this new self. And that feels really mature. That feels helpful to society.
Yeah. And I think, I like the idea that this kind of signal it's not the signal you usually get, or maybe I just don't get it on my YouTube algorithms. But it does seem to be an important signal that you guys are transmitting here.
I would say we've had a hard time finding it as well, which is why, when I started talking to John Vervaeke, he was instantly just like, he did the John Vervaeke thing with his hands. It was like, oh my God, you're applying my work to gender. I should have done this already. Like, this is great, and like he was like, I'm not satisfied with any of the academic views on gender. but this is like where it's at, and then, talking with John and Gregg later, we just kind of developed this thing that I haven't seen. And of course, and Ayden has been like super instrumental in it. And Adriana, like as like a reflecting point from like her point of view on trans people, like, it's like, it feels really powerful, like this building like wall of energy that we have going that, to me, like you said, I think you said something earlier, Andrew, that made me think like now I look at men and I'm like so appreciative of masculinity. Like, I'm just like, it's such a great thing. It's wonderful. And like a lot of men are not able to like fully step into that, they can't grow up. And it's like, but when you see a man doing that, inhabiting that, it's like this beautiful thing. It's so cool and great, and so like I think like if we work this right, what we'll get is like between us, we'll be able to actually paradoxically for some people, or ironically, like clarify gender differences more and help people appreciate themselves, and like the kids like appreciate themselves as just a normal, cisgendered person, like person who's not trans, like, and not say that that's just, like that has nothing to do with lesser than, or it's not special all of a sudden or whatever, like, but that the whole thing is important. We're all part of this greater community, this tribe, and none of us can be, like Ayden always says, the well-rounded individual for everybody. So, trans people aren't the shit. Like we don't have this like special, ability to be everything either, of course.
What's coming up for you, Ayden, in all this?
Yeah, I mean, I think that like there's a weird way that that well-rounded individual thing pops up so much because it speaks to the way that in the United States, at least, like education is like all about that. It's like basically the message you get like from when you're really, really young. It's like you're supposed to become this well-rounded individual, and that's what like people are going to be looking for on your resume. That's how you can be a successful professional. That's how you can be a good member of your community and contribute to your family, is by being this well-rounded individual. But the thing is that like if we just like what we're doing essentially with the well-rounded individual is we're creating flatlands. Like we're zooming out so far that we're creating flatlands. And like I think that there's like there's a lot of like toxicity that comes out of the repression that builds up from that. And I think that like that's a lot of what we were experiencing as like cultural upheaval right now has to do with deep repression about our differences, that like we can't just be like these perfect cogs in a machine for capital, essentially. Like and I don't want to make this like an economic conversation, but I think that it's worth considering how much of feminism is repressed through the process of trying to fit into the job market. How much of masculinity is like, it's basically like they're each losing. Everybody's losing by this. Yeah. So like, it's not as if like anyone is like a quote unquote victim. It's that we're all suffering because we're neither inhabiting all that we could be, and that includes, just like Rachel is pointing to, our ability to support each other. So we can neither inhabit ourselves well nor support each other as well, as long as we try to pretend like, there's, that, like, for example, I think that's really what the whole transition thing is the whole trans thing is like pushing back on in society, is this like, oh, well, like, I'm going to say I was born in the wrong body. I'm going to do this whole transition thing. But like, regardless of that, like, I've always been this. Like, regardless of all of those realities, I've always been this. It's like, there's a denial of development in general when it comes to, like, to me, that says more about our culture broadly, that anybody can even hold that concept in their head. You
That's
know what
almost,
I mean? Like,
yeah, what you made me think about is it's almost a theological thing. It's like It's like we're born sinful, we're born wrong, we're born bad, and we have to become, who we are. It's very Protestant, and that seems to be a big part of the the problem with that ethic is that's not really true. It's not really true. We just have different stages of who we are in our life. It seems to me.
I think like safe spaces is like a concept that is like super unfortunate that it's been co-opted, because like really that's what, to me, that's like what a Bard Absolute is meant to create. It's meant to create safe spaces for exploration. It's meant to create safe spaces for nurturing.
Or for danger.
Yeah,
Right.
like both, all of
like
those things, like
doing dangerous things. It needs a parameter, needs a safe space. It's a kind of a paradox, right? If you just had a safe space so you could just be safe, what would the point of that be? Because people don't really want, people don't want to be safe. That's the most boring thing in the world. People want to be alive, right? And be in the context of being alive. Children need safe spaces in that sense.
Yeah.
But I think we do need safe spaces to explore the more different or creative or sometimes dark aspects of our nature.
Yeah, if you go to like a proper Pride Fest or drag show or something, like an adult version, you get that sense. I like to say make queer again. Like it's dangerous, it's weird, it's unsettling, and it's not for the kids, really. Like the family, pride parade with a million different identity flags and stuff like that I kind of like to pick on a lot. But like you get a sense of that, like, oh, there's something also very fey about the whole experience. Like there's this otherworldly magic that comes in, and you realize that like this seems to be something that can be brought into the world, but you have to know how to filter it properly. It's not meant for unadulterated use by regular people, probably.
Yeah. I was talking to Jamie Will. Sorry.
Oh no, sorry. I was just gonna say that it's pushing culture. It's evolving culture from the fringes, just like tapping into something that's not ready quite for the masses, but just a little bit of signal, and then starts moving us in a different.
Yeah. Well, I was going to say, I was talking to Jamie Wheel, and he was talking about the Burning Man scene, and he said that it's like he was going to all these events, and it was like 4 degrees removed from the Burning Man scene, except everybody was dressing the part. There was the simulacrum of the thing, and then but it became popular, and maybe that is a danger in this trans movement, that it would sort of, maybe that is the danger, that it becomes some sort of popular movement. Whereas it's really a sort of, it belongs in a dangerous periphery space, liminal space.
It's so undeniably experimental. Like if you like anybody who tries to act like, oh, you're gonna go on hormones, everything's gonna be fine, we know exactly what will happen to you, is like doing a huge disservice. Like you don't know. You don't know what's going to happen. You don't know what your experience is going to be. You don't know who you're going to become. You don't know how your relationships are going to change. You don't know how your perception of the world is going to change. You need to get real with how huge of a shift this is. These aren't fucking toys. Like these are serious drugs. This is a serious change with serious consequences that you cannot turn back from in a very big way. So, and that's like the way that I would put it is that I would never recommend to anybody to be trans. I would never recommend to anybody to transition. That's totally bonkers. Like the idea of that is insane to me. So it's really like, that's one of the things that like, I feel like more trans people need to say, just to make it clear, to make it clear, not because I feel like there's this weird implication that snuck in.
It's going to be a nice experience, and you're going to be guided all the way through, and mommy and daddy will be there. And whereas this is like surgery, man. This is drugs.
Yeah, and
it's a
even short of that, like something that really struck me a few months ago, I was driving in the car with my family, and my mother-in-law started talking about, so she recently retired as a nurse from for her entire career. She had been working in the same hospital and like knows everybody there really well. And one of her coworkers has a daughter who had started like, basically started saying that she wanted to go by masculine pronouns, or at least I can't remember honestly whether it was non-binary or masculine pronouns, and that it was just like there was so like as my mother-in-law was describing it, she's just like, oh, like their entire world is just being like torn apart. Their social life is destroyed. They don't know how to fit in. They don't even want to go to school. They're staying at home because they can't face their peers. And I actually had an unexpected reaction as I was sitting there. I was like, why are they doing this? Like, why, like, what do you think is being gained from this process? Like, it is only causing pain for this person in this case. Like, and I'm not saying that it's always going to be that way. And I might even be misreading that situation. Like, I'm not trying to claim like any particular pathway is right or wrong for anyone, but I think it's like useful to get real about your particular child and your particular culture and where you are and like what is actually being improved by doing this now here, and I think that's like there's what I would say is like the big, like my kind of like theory behind why the childhood transitions are happening or being like people are supporting it and saying, okay, let's keep going on this, is actually because it's anti-trans.
Mm-hmm.
I actually think that it's anti-trans to say that there's this kid who's identifying with the cross-sex.
It belittles the experience. Then is that what you're saying?
It belittles the experience, mm-hmm. But it also is
trivializes it.
It's an attempt to actually erase trans people. To try to have kids like, oh, we're going to put puberty blockers into your body because that shouldn't affect you in any other negative way. Mm-hmm. And then we're going to put you on hormones when you're finally at the age where it's legally permitted. Like, no. You're all you're trying to do is you're trying to prevent the reality of their biology to come to fruition. And their reality of their biology as a trans person is that they're actually, I have a like mostly female body that I treat with testosterone, right? Like I fully like matured in this body, and I like what I would say is like additional surgeries could be like really like intimidating for kids who are thinking about like, oh my gosh, I'm going to get this estrogen and now my hips are going to get bigger and I'm going to get breasts and then I'm going to have more work done and like it's going to be harder. I feel like this is how people are looking at it, is they're like, oh, we're going to make their lives harder by having them wait and mature and then transition, when they can make it as a fully, nobody's ever fully realized, right? But like at least somebody who has given their body, their brain an opportunity to develop relatively naturally, like I feel like it's so experimental. I worry about like literal brain development of these kids who are going on puberty blockers. Yeah. Hormones are extremely crucial to brain development. Like, how do you think this is not affecting them on some extremely deep level? And again, I would just say, I really think this points towards actually fear of trans people, fear of trans identities, right. Is actually pushing people towards transitioning children because they want them to be not trans people. They want them to be as closely biologically the cross-sex as they can possibly manage.
Right. So you're distinguishing between trans people and people who are just like, an imitation of a woman or something, or an imitation.
No, not even that.
The notion of passing, is that what you're saying? The notion of passing, like if you transition really, really young,
Yeah.
that you're trying to erase that you were born in a
Yes.
different body, which actually for me, in some ways, if you keep this hidden in yourself and you're always afraid of people finding out, in some ways you're already separating yourself from the world. You're already in there's some turmoil that's always going to perpetuate with you. I think that this notion of passing is really sad because
Of passing.
the history.
Can you explain, like,
Passing-
I haven't heard that term, so I don't really know what you mean. It means just it means, missing the whole developmental process.
Passing as the other gender. So for example, and you guys correct me if so for example, when people don't notice you as trans, so if you so a lot of the anxiety, and Rachel has pointed to something that I was touched by. She says in some places it actually feels really good to pass because it's dangerous to be trans. And that's another piece. This is like, if we don't make space for the real shamanoids, like let's say that this is, I don't even know the percentage, but there's a small percentage of the population that really embodies that role. If we don't see that as safe, then even the ones that really want to honor their whole history have to want to pass because it's unsafe to be seen as trans, because it can be attacked on the streets, like on a very basic level. So it's really, and I love what Ayden was saying, because it I think it kind of weaves the whole conversation. This is where we meet Peterson. It's like, this is where Peterson and us kind of like, it's not, we're not saying that he's wrong by trying to protect young kids. There's a lot of right in it, but then there's a lot of noise that might come with it if this is not acknowledged as Ayden and Rachel. I blended both. Ayden and Rachel are bringing a fundamental piece, because it's I really believe that a culture that has forgotten itself needs the shamans, like needs people to come and go like, this is our role. So no wonder it has been a surge of the energy coming through. And then the last piece that I was going to say is that for kids, kids like on the developmental stage, kids really need to belong. I mean, all of us humans need to belong, but kids, they're really imitating their peers, they're copying their peers. Developmentally, they're more in the collective mindset than their own individuation. They don't have that clear. So if like becoming, it's a really tricky thing to then like, let's say, want to change your gender because that's kind of cool, like so blob together. It's like, oh, that's now what we do if we're confused. And then if you want to not do that, then you're leaving a group, because there is, funnily enough, this whole notion of sovereign individual, like if we're just individuated as a culture, like we're so hyper individuated, which is not true, like we need each other, we're interpenetrated, but modernity has made us believe that we're so individuated that if you belong to a trans group, or if you belong to something, you belong to something, at least you're belonging. And if you're just not, you're just on your own. So the whole notion of rites of passages and trying to cocoon the kids to belong to something, and then try to understand their turmoil, and as adults understand the nuances that these turmoils do happen anyway. Not even that you're transitioning, they happen because as you're having female hormones, or if you're having male hormones, that's going to happen in teenagerhood. So it's a very big conversation. And
that's
I wanted
huge,
to add just about passing, like I feel like, as aside from the danger issue, if like say like there's no major danger in being trans in culture, like I feel like the best way to go about like making your decisions as a trans person is to like move toward what you fit better in, like all the time. So like when I started, like I was like, oh, I'll put on some black nail polish because that's still kind of fairly masculine looking, and I'll go out in that. And I was like nervous to do that, and it felt really good. And then I just like, maybe I'll try this, maybe I'll try that, and then it's like, maybe I'll have boobs now. Like, I mean, it just like kept going and going, but it's towards something and not away from the past, not in fear of, I'm not trying to like, eliminate the person I was. I'm actually like, I went through a whole like I had like a major like crying period where I like had like just felt like this gratitude toward this person who had gotten me to this point. Like I was like, I know he was so scared of this. Like he was so terrified, and he did it anyway. Like this was like this like heroic bravery that got me, that created me, in some way. It's almost, it's like I am that person and I'm not, but like it's like almost like having a parent that sacrificed themselves for you. It was, I just like broke down, like realizing that really deeply. And I feel like that grieving that person is important too, to an extent, accepting that, grieving it, not hating it, all of that continuity of life is, otherwise, how do you become whole, right? Like you don't become whole by cutting off a whole bunch of your life. It's so backward.
And wholeness isn't perfection. It's not becoming this model version of something, whether it's trans or whatever, it's wholeness is becoming you. It's like, with all your kind of, idiosyncrasies, I would
Totally.
say.
Full participation, right? Like that's what I want. I want full participation in life.
And I think like it's really important again to point out that like as if we can kind of start to be more adult about how we inhabit gender generally, like it's like an entire community, not just like trans people or anything. It might actually be possible for trans people to more successfully transition as well, because they'll actually have better role models. Like it's taken me it's taken me a while to kind of like feel like I've built up a like adequate range of masculine role models for myself, because it's so hard to find them. And I feel like it may be the case that it may actually be the case that there's like more adequate female role models out there at this point, because it definitely feels like there's been such a deep collapse of the masculine. And this is something that I find it fascinating. I think, I don't know like who originally, like where this originates from, but I know that Bard brings up the idea that everything shifted after 1945, that, we've never really recovered from the dropping of the bomb. And I think that there's something about like, there's something about like confrontation that feels really like deeply a part of this. Because when you're always accommodating, when you're always like just trying to like smooth things over, there's no way to hold on to your actual opinion and your actual identity. In order to be an adult, you have to be willing to confront. And what I see of masculinity and like the broad population is I see these baby men. Where there's like so much, like if you look at it, like my wife is as I referred to her last night, a boss ass bitch. She's fucking awesome. So she manages a native plant nursery and has a few managers. Hopefully they won't watch this, but she manages a couple of these men as managers. So she's like their superior, right? And they sound like toddlers. The way that they respond to her directing them to do their actual job. It's just like nobody can own up to their responsibility, to their role in society. It's like respect is like so hard to come by. And all of these things, like it's just this it's this inability to just like stand up and confront reality as it is, and that's something that like going back to Peterson, it's like that's like I think what drew me to him initially was just the sense that like, yeah, like everybody needs to start doing this shit. Like everybody needs to be taking more responsibility for who they are and who they're becoming, how they treat their spaces, how they treat the people in their environment. Like that's the through line that I see. So I feel like there's common ground there somehow. And
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, well, I was talking to somebody the other day about how this culture is everything's very easy and safe and kind of like we have everything, but we have to make difficulty for ourselves. Otherwise, we just end up being enormous babies, right? So we have to create, problems and difficulties. It's like Kierkegaard, said that, it's like I'm sitting around smoking a cigar, everything's going sort of like, nicely in some ways, even though I'm suicidally depressed. I have everything I need, and a lot of people are like that, right? That's like, but they're just too comfortable. So it's in a way, again, we have to manufacture these rites of passages or crises or at least challenges, challenge ourselves in an intense way, or we never feel fully, up to our fully human.
Mm.
Yeah.
In the work of the menstrual cycle, but that applies to men as well, applies to all of us. But in the work of the menstrual cycle, we say that, so the menarche, which is the first blood, so the first period, it initiates a girl into her womanhood, and then whatever is planted at that time is going to teach her of how to be a woman, what's valued in her culture, and then she'll harvest that at menopause. So there's a whole planting of the seed in this time. So I'm thinking of like the boy version of that as well, but I'm just thinking for girls, I mean, I've heard so many stories, and it's like what we plant at that time is that we don't plant anything about the feminine. We have no idea. Most women, when they do these workshops, they have horrible stories about their first periods, and then what's planted is like, oh, you just go for it, you just whatever it is, and then they notice when they start noticing what they harvested, and when they got pregnant, when they had birth, or whatever, even if they didn't get pregnant, what they harvested is a disconnection from that part of themselves, and they became really good at becoming being linear because that was planted. That was what was planted right there. So I think that there's a lot of truth in the boy version as well, and caring for society. So this work of rites of passages, I think it's fundamental. And there's a lot of people starting to do this work of teaching boys and teaching girls in whatever way, not just the menstrual cycle, but initiating them into adults, like Aydan's saying, so we can actually mature and not become like older toddlers as we progress, and just with more responsibility, but no capacity to deal with the complexities of the world without collapsing into
no energy, right?
Yeah,
it's like this burnout culture, people lose their elan, energy, and that is really based in your sex on some level, right? In your in your eros, in your passion for life. But yeah, that's what I think that what you're saying makes me think that it's getting back to the most primordial religion or sacredness. Like what you were saying, kind of, Adrian, is that we have to make these things. There has to be a gravity to, let's say, the transition process. It can't be just a trendy thing that people do that becomes another, another. There has to be, and that's like profoundly religious or something. That's like, in the true sense.
If it's done right, it can also further aspiration beyond that transition. It can like open you up in this way that you're like, oh, this is what it's like to become a different person with more capacities, a new worldview, etc. Right? So if it's handled right, and you have the proclivity for it, obviously, most people, this isn't going to be the transformation that they need in their life, obviously. But like, if it's done well, I find that it's like, it gives you all this capacity that is similar to other forms of transformation that you see in religious and spiritual practice.
Yeah, I know. Like, I lived in a monastery, a Buddhist monastery, and what I noticed is if you get a lot of men together, they become maternal with each other. They take care of each other. They become softer and speak more quietly and sort of become more elegant. Like monks are often like that. where and you get the women together, they kind of grow beards and they get tough, they want to, it's an interesting dynamic of, again, I think that it's very important, this whole, like, and I remember hearing about this Aikido master, like you said, that when he was a young guy, he was this really, this great Aikido master. He was very powerful and muscular and kind of just, warrior. And then when he became old, he transitioned into a woman's body just naturally. He became fluid and soft and grew breasts and.
And I mean,
so it's interesting. Like, this is imitating real things. It's not just a game.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, exactly. And I was even gonna bringing the rites of passages again. That's what happens post-menopause. So naturally, the woman becomes post-menopausal woman would be more integrating her masculine, and a post-andropause, I think it's called, the man who becomes more feminine. So it feels really beautiful because the polarities are always dancing with each other, and so it makes total sense to me, Andrew, when you say about the men together, become more maternal, and the women together. It's like you sense in yourself, if you're an intelligent, responsive with reality, you sense, oh, there's too much yin here, too much feminine. We need a little bit of yang, or we need. So it's this. It feels really true. So when I hear you saying that, because when I inhabited places with a lot of women in these, there was a time that I was doing a lot of work with women. You have that. It's not to the point of growing beards, but it was. You have the sliding scale of yangness, you amongst us. There is that forms, and
because you need the whole thing, right, in a community, so that those elements naturally develop. So this has been great, this conversation. Are we drawing somewhat to a close? Do you guys have? Do you want to sort of go around one more time and say a few things, or is there anything burning that needs to be said?
I do have something. I just want to I want to close by reiterating what I said at the beginning about the tenor of the conversation is only becoming, I feel like, more toxic in our culture. And, it's important to point out, like I don't think I actually got to this point in what I was explaining with my following of Peterson, but one of his guests more recently was the guy who did the documentary "What Is a Woman?" And frankly, I was really appalled to hear this gentleman admit that their goal, his goal, is to make it illegal for trans people to be treated of any age.
To be treated like what?
Of any age, right?
Medically treated, to receive any kind of medical treatment. His whole thing is basically no, he doesn't think that trans people should be, or that doctors should be allowed to treat trans people. And in that moment, as he's saying that, it was really disappointing because over the years, I feel like Peterson has at least tried to make it more about the kids, which is take that for what it is. It's not fantastic, but it's at least a more responsible view. But I was disappointed to hear that he was well, I want to kind of push back, but I think I sort of agree with you. He kind of gave this half-assed response to it. I was is this really, so it's getting, it's not, there's it's not quantifiable, but it does seem to be that the conversation is drifting more and more extreme when it comes to pushback. So it is what it is. I think there's a beauty to this conversation that like I feel almost guilty for like bringing this kind of like dark moment at the end, but this is a confrontation thing, right? Like,
Yeah.
you know, I can't, like, we're in a very safe space. Like, I know that you're extremely respectful, and that like this was a good that Parallax was a good space to be able to have this conversation. But I do, you know, every time I do one of these videos, I do have a moment where I wonder, okay, I hope people don't, you know, like look me up and try to do harm to me or my family. We need to be real about that like that, you know, there's very real world consequences that are associated with this conversation, and like huge motivation for me to push forward and try to like do it.
Yeah.
Because I think that a lot of people are too scared in whatever realm they happen to inhabit themselves. I think a lot of people are too scared to put themselves out there, which is fine. I respect that. Yeah.
Yeah, that's something I've been thinking about and wanting to talk about as well. You know, because in a way, as I say, I'm quite fond of Jordan Peterson in many ways, and I've noticed a fury in his recent iteration, and I think a fury is always based on a scapegoat, and that's always unconscious. Like, I don't know if he knows that that's happening, you know. But when there's a scapegoat, there's fury, and that's so there is that danger that trans people get scapegoated. I mean, trans people have probably been scapegoated forever on some level. I mean, because the scapegoat is always the most vulnerable, you know, type of person. So
I think
I think it is good to talk about that, and again, I am going to send this to Tammy and Jordan and see if they see what they have to say about it.
What I
with
would
your
love,
permission, you know.
I would love it if he walked that back. Just walk that part back, you know, like just something like, because this is a really, really dangerous thing to suggest that adults cannot have the right to
well, we have
access
to
medical
distinguish
care.
very clearly between adults and children here. Very, very clearly. I mean, you know, adults, you know, it's that's just an obvious thing, I would say.
Yeah.
I was gonna add that just I love that you brought this in, Ayden. I think it's important. Like when you brought your fear, I was just like, it brought home, because I was just like, yeah. And we're talking about all this aspirational and this nuance, and actually, and culture is not there yet. Culture is not nuanced. It's collapsing everything into one thing. It's hating one side and hating the other, and that's and I think so. If Peterson's watching that, or watches that, I'd say that with this voice, when you have a voice that's heard by a lot of people, you would have to grow your responsibility. Like, I actually really believe that, like we have to maintain nuance and the capacity to be nuanced, because if thousands and thousands and thousands of people are just going to follow you blindly, then it's you need to engage from a place that's not just from trigger. And I've noticed, I've noticed that there were some conversations that Peterson's talking from a place of trigger, which feels to me different than talking from a strong masculine. A strong masculine that is strong and boundaried feels different than a masculine that's triggered and responding from a place of being aggravated. So I think that needs to be unpicked for the sake of the whole culture and all of us. In the end, we're all humans and trying to do this thing called life to the best of our ability all the time. So I think compassion and boundaries and being able to face conflict, they go hand in hand. Because if we don't hold compassion, also we're not going to really truly be in hard conversations. We're going to be collapsed in the face of them. So then that's not really generative. That's just me attacking you, you attacking me, and me not listening to you, you not listening to me, and that's not interesting. So
yeah, and I guess John Vervaeke is an example of the opposite kind of. He his reaction to Rachel of okay, we're bringing this to another level. This is, and him getting very excited about that. That's kind of how I feel when I'm talking to you guys as well. So that would be a good spirit to emulate. Any final thoughts, Rachel?
I just, right now, I'm feeling a lot of gratitude for being here with you guys and having this conversation, and who knows where it's going to go. I'm always like, things could go real dark real fast, but like every time we have one of these, I'm like, at least we're really seeking the truth and trying to work through things and, look at nuance and really open space for conversation. And that is, for me, it is, John is like philosophy dad to me. So like, I like, think of that spirit, the Philia Sophia, as much as possible, and how the world just needs that in all kinds of ways. But like, we can't shirk our duty to be part of that, like as much as we can, even if it's like, sometimes it feels like you're the canary in the coal mine, or the storm crow or something, but like, I'm hoping that somehow we can make it worthwhile.
Very good. Yeah, this has felt very important to me personally. So to get to know you guys a bit and to talk about these things, because I haven't had this kind of a conversation before. So I'm very glad to be doing this, and I hope we can do it again.
Thank you so much for having us.
Andrew.
Yeah, with huge pleasure. Take care, guys.
All right. Big love, you guys.
Big
Bye,
love.
big love. Bye.
Good night.
Bye.